Hi, I'm Oscar and I'm back to give you our latest Formula E summary from the Monaco E-Prix. And we'll start with quali, seems like the sensible thing to do. And in Group A, we had Cassidy making a crucial error at turn 1 on the final flying lap of his, which really destroyed any chance he had of progressing to the next stage. But then we saw it was Vandoorne, Vergne, and Grassi going through. The three V sounding names there. That's not as easy to say as it sounds. And the shocks, you'd say, probably Bird going out in 5th and Mortara down in 8th. I mean, he was leading the championship only a race or two ago. So definitely a shock for him to be down that far. And in Group B, it's the turn of Dennis now to make a pretty similar mistake to what Cassidy did. Spinning in turn 1. Obviously then, no chance to get through to the knockout stage. But it's Evans, De Vries, Lotterer and Frijns who are going through, which are the ones you'd expect really, because they were the top 4 of the championship in this group. So on to the quarterfinals, and first up we had Vandoorne against Frijns, and Vandoorne made up a bunch of time in the middle sector, which is what saw him get through. Then in the second quarterfinal, it was Vergne against Lotterer, a tale of two Porsches, and it was quite similar to the first quarterfinal in that Vergne made up a lot of time in the middle sector, and then didn't really look like he was going to get challenged by his teammate. In quarterfinal 3, we had De Vries against Vergne. De Vries suffered heavily with sliding out throughout the whole of this lap, and Vergne got through comfortably in the end. And in the last quarterfinal, it was Evans against Grassi, and Evans sent the fastest time of the duel so far, and overcame Grassi pretty comfortably as well. So on to the semi-finals, and Vandoorne against Vergne. Well, it's Vergne who moves through to the final by getting the better of Vandoorne by just a shade under 2/10, which isn't too bad at this stage. It's a pretty good gap. And in the other semi-final, it was Evans against Vergne. And it was an excellent ebb and flow of lap time throughout this duel, although it properly showed what the duels are all about. But it was Evans who advanced in the end by 1/10 of a second. And then on to the final, and it's Evans against Vergne. Evans takes pole after a dominating lap, 2.5 tenths advantage over his rival, and it's just continuing this brilliant run of form he's had. Obviously 2 wins last time out in Rome, and now pole here in Monaco. So, shall we move on to the race then? Seems like a sensible thing to do, and off the start, as we kind of often see in Formula E, there wasn't a great deal of movement at the front. Frijns did drop a place, however, as he had to cut turn 1. Dennis really was the big mover here over the first few laps, up 5 places, I believe it was. Sam Bird, no such luck from him. He had a pretty terrible day. I mean, he had the 3-place grid penalty from the previous round, and then he made a mistake and dropped to pretty much near the back, and then a lap later and his car's broken and he's into the pits retiring. I mean, just a complete weekend to forget for him. And it's just kind of what I feel. I really like Sam Bird, but he just doesn't have consistency to fight for the championship. Later on we'll look at the championship, and some of the guys up there, they've just been brutally consistent so far. And he doesn't really have that in his locker. When he's on it, on his day, he's absolute fire, can beat everyone. But it's just too many mistakes, really. Then the melee of attack mode start, and it's Frijns who triggers it, really, going first, swiftly followed by Vergne, and then sort of the rest of the leaders filter through. And at this point, it's looking very good for Vergne. He's right at the front, leading everyone, but now he's out of attack mode. All the other people who are in front of him, but are now behind him, but have attack mode. What's going to happen? Well, what happens is this. Vergne makes a couple of great moves, first on Evans and then on Vergne to take over the lead. And also Vandoorne, I think, gets past Evans as well to get himself up to 3rd. And then something just inconceivable happens. Vergne leading the race, and his car just grinds to a halt and stops. Absolute heartbreak for him. I mean, you just feel like he gets quite a lot of bad luck in this series. And that, of course, brings out the full course yellow. Not good news for Vergne, as he had just taken attack mode. So I got all the disadvantage, losing out 2 positions, dropping from what he'd inherited as the lead down to 3rd, but not getting any of that extra power to actually use because he's stuck on the full course yellow limiter. After the full course yellow ends, Vandoorne seems to have gained a ridiculous amount of time. It kind of brings into question again, does full course yellow work? Because, you know, the gaps after it are never what it is before, and this is the biggest change I'd ever seen. But ultimately that doesn't really matter, because just a lap later Rowland pile drives kind of into Lotterer as he loses it at turn 1 while going for a big move, and that brings out the safety car, so all those gaps are closed up anyway. So the safety car comes in with 9 minutes of normal time left, with the order now Vandoorne leading from Evans and Vergne, but Evans still has an attack mode to use. Frijns also has an attack mode to use, and he uses it immediately off the start and is able to regain his positions that he loses from it. So he was in fourth, he dropped down, and then he managed to get past Grassi and Costa to get back up to where he was before. So that kind of shows what you could do with it. Evans then takes his attack mode and drops only behind Frijns, and then the next lap he's able to get past him. So maybe it's not too bad after all. Not long later, and he's able to make a move on Vergne to get into second place down into turn one. But sadly, with I think it was less than a minute of attack mode remaining for him, he wasn't really able to make any headway into Vandoorne's quite sizable lead. And not much really else happens during the remainder of normal time and the added on 4.5 minutes we had for the safety car. So it's Vandoorne who takes the win, with Evans in second and Vergne just managing to hold off Frijns and his teammate Costa to get that last step on the podium. And also, sadly, on that last lap, we had Gunther running out of energy and dropping from what had been a pretty decent race up to 7th, all the way down to the last finishing position. So if we have a little bit of a look at the finishing positions from elsewhere, you know, decent race from Buemi, getting that Nissan into the points again. He'd done that in Rome as well. Disappointing for De Vries. 10th, you have to say, is well below where he should be in that car, especially with his teammate taking the win. And if we look outside of the point scoring positions, in 11th we've got Sims, who's once again not scored points, probably as close as he's got this year really. Techeetah, decent drive from him into 12th in what is definitely the slowest car. And other than that, I mean, look at those DNFs, Mortara, Lotterer, Rowland, Vergne, but a terrible day for Porsche, but those are all guys who you think could be at the front, maybe the exception being Rowland, his car, that Mahindra, it's not looking that great this year. But yeah, all those other ones, you'd have thought they could be in championship contention this year, so very disappointing for them. So if we have a look at the drivers' standings, it's a new name at the top, and that is, of course, the race winner, Stoffel Vandoorne, who's 6 points ahead of John-Eric Vergne in second, who's a further 3 points ahead of Evans in third. And just what a resurgence has been from Evans. I mean, he had 1 point before Rome, I think it was, and then 2 wins and a second on the bounce. He's really thrown himself up into contention for this championship. But what I was saying earlier about consistency, I mean, Vergne, he's just been there or thereabouts pretty much every race. Similar for Frijns, you know, in fourth, only another point back from Evans. And those guys, I mean, if you can just be brutally consistent, then you're going to be up there. And then kind of you have the opposite end of the spectrum where you have Evans, who's been completely off the pace for 3 rounds and then completely on the pace for 3 rounds. And that can get you up as well. That's just how it works in Formula E. It's nuts. If we look beyond that top 4, it's kind of then a big jump to the next gaggle of cars led by Mortara, who has to be disappointed again. It's just been a run of poor races from him to, it's difficult to say at this stage, drop you out of contention. You have to think guys from that group, Mortara, Lotterer, Vergne, De Vries, maybe De Grassi and Costa as well, but they're going to have like a run of really big results to get back into contention. But if they can keep being consistent, those top 4 like Frijns and Vergne have been, then they're going to just keep pulling away. Looking at the rest of the standings, I mean, Dennis, you just have to think, he started really well, but he's just not got the machinery behind him really to be able to challenge those guys above him. Bird, obviously, hugely disappointed in 12th. You have to be. You can see that is a race-winning car in the hands of his teammate, and he's just not been able to produce this year. And 3 guys still yet to score: Sims, as I previously mentioned, and the 2 dragons of Sette Camera and Giovinazzi. They'll both be disappointed, but you know, they need a crazy race. That's what happened the last time out, and they weren't able to capitalise, but Neo were able to. Their time might come. And if we now flick and have a little bit of a look at the constructors, no surprise, Mercedes leading the way after Vandoorne's race win, 120 points. Then it's a decent gap, 15 points down to Techeetah in second place. And Jaguar, you have to think they've still got a chance because they have 2 excellent drivers. Samba just needs to start performing, which he hasn't really been able to do yet. If he can start getting results along with his teammate, then they can bring it back. And of course, down at the bottom, as I mentioned, Dragon Penske still yet to score, but you can do it, guys. Gio will get a point at some point. So as always, you can follow the F1 couple on Twitter and Instagram, just at the F1 couple. And make sure you like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is, and whatever you're watching or listening to this podcast. And in terms of what's coming up, I'm not entirely sure what the next Formula E race is. I think there's a bit of a gap. But what else? IndyCar. I'm making sure that I'm finally bringing some IndyCar to you, especially as we're into the month of May now. That's where the Indy 500 rears its head, and that'll be excellent, and I'll definitely be covering that. So our F1 podcast will be back, I promise. It has been a crazy time with, work, our normal work, and we're trying to move house, and had a bit of the old Rona floating about. So we've not been able to, this podcast has kind of been put on the back burner. We've not been able to do quite as much as we want, but we will be back. Charlotte is still here, I promise. She's just hiding out of view for the time being. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me. As always, we've been the F1 couple, and until we see you next time, goodbye.